We've just heard from the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. Let's take a listen.
Well, in the 9 months before the election, the last government closed down 200 asylum hotels. Had that rate of closure continued, right now there wouldn't be any asylum hotels at all. And in fact, the last Conservative government closed down this very hotel before the last election. The reason the Labour government are still using hotels is because they have lost control of our borders. They cancelled the Rwanda deterrent just before it started. As a result, the numbers crossing the channel have been the worst ever, and that is why this government has so many hotels costing hard-working taxpayers billions. It's because they've lost control of our borders. Well, it's thanks to the government's own failings they're in this situation in the first place. If they'd continued the previous government's policy of closing these hotels down, this situation would never arisen, and if they hadn't cancelled the Rwanda scheme, by now the crossings would have stopped. But by contrast, the numbers crossing the channel illegally have been the worst in history so far this year because this Labour government has completely failed. And what they've done in this court case is they're using the courts against the British people. They even brazenly argued in court that the rights of illegal immigrants were more important than the rights of local people in Epping. And it is disgraceful that our own government have essentially taken against the British people in this way in a court of law.
You say they've taken against the British people, but the appeal court judges were very clear. They're very critical of the previous judgment, and what they said was unless they put that temporary injunction, the injunction that would have led to the asylum seekers leaving that hotel next month, unless they set that aside, there was a risk of lawlessness, there was an impetus for further protests. In other words, there'd be rewarding protest. Now, obviously, as a party that prides itself as being the party of law and order, surely you must recognise those arguments that protests are not always peaceful, and the judges were worried that this decision, the original decision, could have led to more unrest.
Well, people have the right to peacefully protest within the law. Every citizen has the right to do that, and where they feel angry with the government, as they rightly do, people are perfectly entitled to express their views by peaceful protest. Of course, nobody should break the law, nobody should engage in violent protest. That is completely wrong, and the police should take action if that happens. But the right to peaceful protest is an important part of our democracy.
But my question was, though, that if this decision hadn't been taken, you're saying this against the British people. Actually, the appeal court judges are saying they want to protect the British people in a sense, because they think there is a risk of lawlessness had this original judgment stayed in place.
Well, I think the risk to lawlessness comes because we have a government that has lost control of our borders and a government that isn't listening, a government that is using the courts against the British people. They even brazenly said in court they thought the rights of illegal immigrants were more important than the rights of people in Epping, which was a disgraceful thing to say. So what is really, I think, fueling risks of violent protest is the fact the government haven't got control of our borders. That doesn't, of course, excuse it in any way. Violent protest is always wrong. The police should take action. But what really needs to happen here is the source of the problem needs to be fixed, which is the government need to get control of our borders.
But you are saying there's a risk, you think there's a risk of violent protests if the government continues using asylum hotels and will only exit from them 3 or 4 years down the line?
I think it's the government's policy which is creating the risk of protest becoming violent. Now, violent protest is completely unjustified, but it's the government's policy which is fueling that risk.
Okay, let me ask you another question. Nigel Farage is saying that effectively the European Convention on Human Rights is being used against the people of Epping and indeed other communities where people are concerned about asylum seekers being housed there. You've still to make up your mind on what to do about the ECHR. Surely now you can come and tell us whether you agree with Nigel Farage or you don't.
Well, we've already said that the Human Rights Act, which gives the ECHR legal force in the UK, should be disapplied from all immigration matters, and that would of course have included the judgments in relation to the Epping Hotel. On the wider question of ECHR membership, you are not going to have to wait very much longer.